Next thing that we're learning over here is what you're allowed to do before davening in the morning. Now, once the time of Amud Shacharit comes, which is dawn, so you have an obligation to go daven. And therefore, you're not allowed to do certain things before you daven. Like, for instance, you can't do business, you're not supposed to travel, you're not supposed to do anything, basically, except focus on getting ready to daven. In fact, according to halacha, you're not allowed to eat or drink before davening, except halacha says, but Chassidim are lenient in that, because if you'll be able to daven better, so then you're allowed to eat and drink, because then you're eating in order to daven. You're not eating just because you want to eat. Because the Gemara says, a person that eats before davening, Hashem says, you're putting yourself before you put me. First you have to daven to me, and then you can think about yourself. But if the eating is there for the sake of davening, like Chassidim yesteryear used to daven very long, so then they were allowed to eat before davening, or a person that's older, weaker, whatever it is. If it's for medical purposes, obviously you're allowed to eat before davening.
Before shkir. I mean, not before shkir. I mean, you can eat before dawn.
Before dawn, you don't have an obligation to daven yet. Once dawn comes, you have an obligation to daven. What?
Or do you have to make texts and emails and stuff?
What?
Do brachas? Is that sufficient?
The truth is, ideally, you're not supposed to do any business before davening, period.
That means putting on tefillin?
No, davening. Davening Shmoneh Esrei, the whole works. Some people, if they have no choice, if they at least say brachas, so something of davening they said, so then, but ideally, you should not do business emails, you should not go shopping. It says, Erev Shabbos, Friday morning, if you're going to go after davening to the store, you might not get challah, or like years ago, you might not get anything, so then you can go before davening Friday morning. But like this, in halacha, you're not supposed to do anything before davening. You're not supposed to travel before davening. Okay, not only that, you're not allowed to go out of your way to say good morning to somebody. Like you're not allowed to go special to their house to knock on the door to say good morning before davening. But if you meet somebody in the street or in shul, you're allowed to say good morning. By the way, many poskim write good morning is not even what's called Sheila Sholem, because you don't mean it anyway. You say good morning, like in America, hi, how are you? They don't even wait for the answer because they're not interested.
Regarding eating, is there a limit to what you can eat? Can you wash for bread?
No, the truth is, even when it says in halacha you're allowed to eat, it doesn't mean prime rib dinner with a steak dinner with washing and benching and everything. In the Shulchan Aruch it says you could drink tea without, or coffee without sugar, without milk. Okay, even some of the Zionist people are lenient about in the Hasidic world. But to sit down and wash and have a whole meal, no, you're not allowed to before davening. It's just not right. It's not proper. It's not the proper respect of Hashem. Okay, next, even halachically, you're not allowed to even learn before davening. Unless if it's a set class where you have a kriyas or there's a rabbim, or then you would be allowed to. But because if you don't learn then, you're not going to learn afterwards. But it shows the importance of people realizing, let's bring it down to earth in a simple way. You get up in the morning, the first thing you do, okay, you go to mikveh, all that stuff is all part of davening. But the first thing a person should do is go daven and not take care of business and do everything else under the sun. Before, one second, yeah.
Can you feed an animal before?
If the animal needs to be fed, you can feed an animal before davening, because it's also an obligation that you have to feed your animal. Yes, sir.
On the fast day that starts
What's that? What?
I feed my animal.
Louder.
Me, when I drink coffee before davening.
Now we're learning before Shacharit, before Mincha we'll get to. There's a different din before Shacharit and before. It's not so different, but whatever. What?
On the fast day,
no.
Do you say all the morning brachas before you eat something on the fast day? Or can you?
It depends. Shh. Hello. You forgot already. On a fast day, if you're getting up and you're eating before dawn, so then it depends. If you're going to be staying up, the proper thing, if you're staying up, is to say brachas and then go eat. But again, if it's early in the middle of the night and you're going back to sleep, so then you really don't have to say brachas before you eat. Okay, next dinim over here is the dinim of tzitzis. Now let's explain this whole mitzvah of tzitzis and not to belittle it in any way whatsoever. The mitzvah of tzitzis, both biblical and rabbinic, is if you have a four-cornered garment, you're obligated to put tzitzis onto the garment if you want to wear it. The machlekes in the Gemara Merachos, if tzitzis is an obligation on the garment or on the person. In other words, if I own a garment that I'm not using, do I have an obligation to put tzitzis on it? So the halacha is an obligation on the person. Meaning if a person is wearing a four-cornered garment, he needs to put tzitzis on that garment. There is no obligation. Let me preface it like this. There are certain mitzvahs in the Torah you have an obligation that you must do. Like for instance, tefillin you have to do. Right? Lulav you have to do. Whatever the mitzvah, the positive mitzvahs, you have many of them is a biblical obligation. You have to do it. Certain mitzvahs in the Torah are optional. What do you mean they're optional? For instance, one of the mitzvahs in the Torah is to shecht an animal, to do shchita. If I don't want to eat meat, I don't have a mitzvah in the Torah, I must go do shchita. The Torah says, if I want to eat meat, then I need to do shchita. But I don't have an obligation in the Torah to go do shchita. One of the mitzvahs in the Torah is to divorce your wife. It doesn't mean there's a mitzvah to divorce your wife. If you're breaking up, it has to be done through a get. A mezuzah, for instance. There's no obligation, you must put up a mezuzah. If I'm homeless and I live in the street, you're right. If somebody is homeless and they live in the street, they don't have an obligation to rent a house or buy a house to be able to put up a mezuzah. There's no such thing like that. Tzitzis, halachically, is the same thing. Biblically and rabbinically, we're not done yet with it though. Biblically or rabbinically, the mitzvah of tzitzis is if you have a four-cornered garment, you have to put tzitzis on it. You don't want to wear a four-cornered garment, then halachically you don't have an obligation of putting on tzitzis. Nevertheless, Chazal write that even though you don't have an obligation to wear tzitzis, it's proper. The Gemara says also, Shulchan Aruch says, it's proper and appropriate and it's the thing to do, and it's proper for a person to buy a four-cornered garment to make sure they're wearing tzitzis. Why? Because tzitzis reminds us of all the mitzvahs in the Torah. By the way, this idea explains another thing. Again, we learned the difference between the Sephardic community, the Sephardic poskim and the Ashkenazic poskim. But for instance, a mitzvah a lady doesn't have to do. Let's say lulav, right? The sukkah, a lot of these connected to mitzvahs times. If a woman wants to do it, so the Ashkenazim poskim, like the Ashkenazic poskim, Taisus, Rosh, Rashba, the Ramah, that you're allowed to do it and make a bracha. And we find taka women go out of their way to bench lulav and esrog, or to sit in the sukkah when they can, or to listen to shofar became more an obligation lately. We don't find women putting on tzitzis. It's a mitzvah. They're okay. They're not obligated in doing tzitzis because it's a mitzvah connected to time. What's the time of tzitzis? It says, "O re'isa ma'isai," should see it. So from there, the Gemara learns out because at night you don't see. So Laila loves man tzitzis. So because tzitzis is an obligation during the day and not at night, so therefore halachically women are not obligated to wear tzitzis. So the question is, but why don't we find that women wear tzitzis? Even very firm women that bench lulav and sit in the sukkah and do all this. Why don't we find that they don't wear tzitzis? So there's two reasons for this. One reason is because even men are not obligated. Men are not obligated to get a garment of tzitzis and wear it. Right? It's one a mitzvah, that's an optional mitzvah. So because if it's an optional mitzvah even for a man, when women do it, it's called in halacha mechzer ki yeher, it looks like a show-off. A mitzvah man has to do and a woman wants to do it, fine. But a mitzvah that even a man doesn't have to do, and a woman goes ahead and does it, it's like she's showing off. That's one reason. What's another reason, which is another interesting thing, according to many opinions, many poskim, because tzitzis is a man's garment, tefillin are a man's garment. If a woman wears tzitzis or wears tefillin, she is transgressing the negative commandment of not wearing a man's garment. Because tzitzis is a man's garment and tefillin are a man's garment, so that's why women don't do it. Either because they don't want to be called show off, halacha says, or because they're not allowed to wear tzitzis or tefillin. And the reason for that is because it's a man's garment. Men have an obligation to wear. It's a garment. You wear tefillin, you wear tzitzis. So then if a woman does it, she's wearing a man's garment, which would be biblically forbidden. What?
A poncho. Is that obligated? Do you have to put on tzitzis on a poncho?
If a man wears a poncho that has 4 corners, okay, it's late already, you technically would have to wear tzitzis unless if you round the corner. You ever see the kapotis? The guys wear? Yeah, the long kapotis? Okay, if you look in the back, one corner of the kapota is rounded.
So if you round it,
why? Because a kapota otherwise would have 4 corners, 2 in the front and 2 in the back. So technically a kapota would need tzitzis. But by rounding it, but there's another issue involved. L'mashal, okay, it's not for now, but just to bring up the point. You wear a blanket at night.
right.
You wear a blanket at night. Why doesn't that blanket need tzitzis?
You don't really wear it, you sleep in it.
You wear. Can a blanket be shatnez? No. Why? Because you're wearing the garment. You're covering yourself. That's called wearing. So the question is, if somebody takes a Shabbos afternoon nap under the blanket, that garment needs tzitzis. How can you sleep with tomorrow?